Let us pray. It is our prayer that the true business of our meetings and works will be our spiritual transformation and the transformation of others through us and through our ministries. We ask this of you as we now begin. In the name of God, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. We are so glad you're here. Thank you for the time that you are offering this morning to be with us and to be with so many stewardship folks from around the Diocese of Virginia and the East Coast, and it looks like Britain. Thank you. We're really glad you're here. My name is Julie Simonton. I serve on diocesan staff as your Minister for Congregational Development and Stewardship. And I am casting here from my home, where some of you may have already seen that it's also our school. So you might see my kids running around in the back as they do their classes. Stephanie?
Hi, I'm Stephanie, your Minister for Diocesan Development and Giving. I am also in my home, obviously. And from my home, I have the good fortune looking out my window. I can see our church right next door, which is, although not quite a sunny day today, it is always nice to be reminded of the work that we do. I welcome you to our second conversation in our new Church Vitality Now webinar series. Julie and I have wanted to launch something like this for a while now. We are so glad that you have joined us today. So we look forward to this week's conversation and to hearing from you what would be most helpful for your ministry and your church. And as we look into what we have planned to share, we would like to offer a few notes on how our time together will work. Our conversations are always richer because you are here. So if you haven't yet, as you are joining us, it is really helpful for us to know who you are. So feel free to introduce yourself in the chat and include your first and last name with your Zoom identification. This is always helpful to us because it helps us better address the context in which we are all working right now. Your questions are always welcome, and the ministry work that you are offering at your church is also important for all of us to hear, so that we can benefit from your creativity and your experiences. So as we continue through the webinar, please either use the chat function or the Q&A format to send us questions or to describe what's working at your church. If Julie or I are talking, the other will be watching the chat and the Q&A. So don't worry about interrupting the flow of conversation. Just go ahead and right away. Many of your questions will probably be answered during the webinar, but if your question is very church specific, we'll take the information and we can be in touch with you individually. If the question is too broad for us to answer completely here, we'll do our best with the time we have, and perhaps even it could be addressed in a later webinar. One last note is that you will likely hear many ideas that resonate with you as a possibility for your church to pursue. We suggest that you choose one idea, maybe two. This way, you won't burn yourself out or others, and you will also know what worked. And finally, we will be very grateful for your feedback and ideas about what you would like for us to discuss during future webinars and how we might structure our time together in different ways to best address your ideas, questions, and where you are finding Jesus in your church and your communities. So please don't hesitate to be in touch with us during or after the webinar with your thoughts. Our emails are going to be here in the chat for you to use now or even later on. So over to you, Julie.
All right, thank you. I'm going to take a couple minutes to share the screen so that we have some visual to go along with the conversation. Just a second. All right, here we go. And then I will take a few minutes to readjust my screen. Okay, here we go. And as we start this, please know that all of the information that you're seeing here is available through our website. These slides have already been uploaded to our website. And as well, once we finish this recording, we will put it on the website and continue to make these things available through the diocesan website, as well as through our stewardship Facebook page. So you can always find the most recent information in both of those places. We'll give you those links through the chat function, and we've got them listed at the end of this webinar as well, so that it is available for you. All right, so in today's webinar, we are going to talk primarily about communication and relationship and how that is such an essential part of our stewardship ministries. How this relationship transforms our relationship with others and calls us into deeper relationship with God. We'll talk about what you do now to nurture relationships through communications, and how today's communications, or communications that you're working on now, can help you prepare for stewardship ministries in the fall as we hopefully move back into our churches in some way or another, reintegrate ourselves into ministries that are in the building as well as outside the building, and prepare for the fall annual giving cycle. We'll also have a chat about specific conversations you can have with some of your most generous donors now. We'll talk a little bit about planning and the different calendars we're looking at over the summer, and particularly in the fall as we move back into our church calendar year, and as we move into the annual giving year, and what those different calendars are going to look like and we can anticipate. And then we're going to have a quick conversation that actually will begin to launch us into next week's webinars about holy agility and keeping ourselves ready to be responsive to whatever is going on within our parish and within the larger national and international events. And keep us prepared so that when it's time for us to be responsive, we are ready for that, and we were able to move forward in that with joy and excitement, rather than, oh no, another crisis, what do we do now? But before we get started, we're going to take about 3 or 4 minutes for a quick conversation of last week's discussion, which will set this week's conversation into context. So if you would like to hear the entirety of what Stephanie is about to present, you can find that recording on our Diocesan YouTube channel. And again, it is posted on our Stewardship and Development page, as well as through the Diocesan website. Thank you. Stephanie?
Thank you. The giving curve we discussed last week is based on data from folks who research nonprofit fundraising during crises, and included 3 distinct phases that occur where we are in this curve, and we talked about best practices for healthy stewardship. The curve has a bump, a slump, and a surge into a new normal. At the beginning of a crisis, many organizations see a significant bump in giving, which shows the incredible generosity of individuals. In fact, even groups not on the front lines of a crisis will see a bump as generosity spills over. We've already seen that this giving bump is larger and has lasted longer than anticipated. The story we need to tell is about how the pandemic and the economic downturn is affecting our communities. Donor generosity is very high, and we should be thankful for the funds that people are willing to give. This is a real gift to us, and one I know that some of our congregations are currently experiencing. Because we will get to phase 2, which is the slump. And this will be a mid to long-term period of less than normal giving. Even if your congregation is doing a great job and you're still going to be raising less money for a long time. And the current projections are that this will last probably at least 6 months. But this is our opportunity to tell the good news happening around you and to stay in contact with your parishioners, to show how you're pivoting to navigate the challenges in your community, and to be sure you let people know what you need so that they can help. In phase 2, we're really moving from the sprint to the marathon. We're no longer in the initial shock of the crisis, but it's not business as usual. You're still going to need to send more communications during this time, not less. And don't forget to provide a way to let folks give financially. They may not be able to give as often or as much, but we don't want to take that choice away from them because it's not our decision to make. This will be a long period of time, and we will be using all of our best practices to keep everyone engaged. Please remember, though, that even when we see that we have less revenue, this is normal, and it is not a value judgment on the work that we are doing. We need to keep doing the good work that we're doing, because then we get to the surge and the new normal. This will happen as the economy picks up, and you see, however, though, that there are 2 lines, and they tell 2 very different stories. The bold line shows a dramatic increase in giving for the organizations that keep their best practices, that have developed their connections, and have deepened their relationships. The best practices that we know we need to do the work of good stewardship help us to the other side of this challenging time. And we want to help all of our congregations come through this stronger together. Lee and I are going to continue to have these conversations all through the year. We're going to talk about this as part of our calls in May, during our annual giving webinars in June, and certainly on our Facebook page as we deal with these challenges together. You can find the article that I referenced posted on our Stewardship and Development Facebook page on the Diocesan website, and I'll post the link here in the chat.
I'm ahead of you. I already did it.
Oh, excellent. I'll scroll down to the chat. There we go.
Yeah, if I don't know how many of you have been working to facilitate conversations and meetings and Zoom, but it is quite a ministry thing to have all of these different screens that you're navigating, and you make one move and other things disappear, and then of course when you're talking you can't follow the chat. So the stewardship of Zoom meetings is maybe that should be one of our conversations too. All right, we'll get started here as I navigate all of the different screens that I am seeing here. All right, so we're going to talk today, as we discussed earlier, about communication and stewardship relationships, stewarding these relationships. So a lot of folks in our churches, if they have not worked in the ministry of stewardship within our parish, a lot of folks think that stewardship is about pledge cards and metrics. And it certainly is. I know my hunch is that if many of you have asked folks within your church to participate with you in stewardship ministries, quite often the response is, no, I'm not going to ask folks for money. That is a part of it, but that is not what is at the heart of stewardship and what many of you who live into a deep ministry of stewardship already know. The ministry of stewardship is about the ministry of communicating and telling stories. Because when we have effective communications in stewardship, we answer a call to discipleship. It is not a call about money, but it is a call, as you see here on the screen, about the way I like to define stewardship, which is using the gifts God gives us to do the work God calls us to do. Our time, our talent, and our tithe, our money, are all ways that we call others to use the many gifts that God gives us to do the work God calls us to do. So we, as ministry leaders in our congregations, are called not only to our specific area of ministry and stewardship, which does for us include pledge cards, spreadsheets, and metrics. Yes, it does. But we're called to participate deeply in the relationships within our congregation. The deeper we move into stewardship, in the ministry of stewardship, the deeper we move into the opportunity to share our stories, to share the story of God, and deeper into the opportunity to welcome others deeper into this story as it manifests in the story of our congregation. Our part of the story is not only to live into God's call to ourselves, but to share how we as a faith community and how your congregations specifically listen to God and follow God's call. So it is a call of relationship. It is a call of relationship with God, with self, and with the communities. And these relationships are live, they are dynamic. Each person is always in a different place because of the experiences I have today of myself, of God in my life, and the community in which I live. That changes me every day. And it is the same for, of course, everyone within our church and the life of the congregation itself. So our communications as stewardship ministers need to consistently reflect how this lives and moves and breathes and has its being. And it also needs to consistently reflect that these relationships are taking place in different areas of relationship with God, self, and community. So for some churches, stewardship ministers and communication ministers often are the same person. And in other churches, these people work closely together. So as we move into this conversation, think about the context that you have, how much of the communications you are doing, how much you work with others who provide communications for your church, and how those relationships can be navigated and enriched as we continue the conversation as you move toward the fall and re-entry into our parishes and into the ministry of full parish work within our buildings, and how that differs from the ministry of full communication, relationship, and parish work now that so much of it is virtual. So at the heart of it is our call for ourselves and for the ministry leaders with whom we work, and the ministry leaders that you as stewardship ministers work to coach, right? You work to coach your vestry members in leadership. You work to coach if you're not a clergy, if you're on here and you're not clergy, quite often you work to coach clergy to help you with your stewardship ministries. If you are clergy, you work to help coach laity. So those of us who work in stewardship not only have our own leadership, but we work to coach others in leadership, to meet people where they are and to invite them deeper into their own relationships. And we are called now more than ever to be deliberate in how we prepare for this, and how we work with other leaders in our churches to instill and nurture best practices so that our faith communities continue to be vibrant and relevant now, and as we continue to navigate the many pivots that we're living into right now and that we know that we have in front of us, that we can be more deliberate and prepared each time we're called to pivot and live into a new response. So when we think of stewardship, right, we know it's not about money. We just had a rich conversation on that, and I would love to hear your reflections about how you have navigated this with yourself and with other leaders. We know it's not about money, but at the same time, this is the ministry area that is often called to discuss and ask for money, and to serve as the connection between the spreadsheets of our treasurers and finance folks, to connect that with God's call to a life of generosity. So with that in mind, we need to ensure that we are living boldly into the best practices of our relationships, because part of our call is to invite others into financial generosity. And it's important to understand this fundamental understanding of fundraising and what is the difference between healthy fundraising and healthy spreadsheets. So in the end, here's an important takeaway. In the end, people are going to give their time, their wisdom, and their money to the church because they are emotionally engaged with the organization. They are not going to give their money, their time because your junior warden makes impassioned pleas about light bulbs. These light bulbs are important. We would not have the same worship experience if we didn't have light and electricity in the house, but that is not often the reason that people are compelled to give their money. They want to give their money because they know what that light bulb does. They know that that light bulb is above the chancel, and that light bulb shines down when babies are baptized and mothers are buried and weddings are celebrated. That light bulb lights a path to God. Right? So you need to be in a place to not just say we need light bulbs, but to tell the story of the light bulb, right? So in the end, people are going to give to your organization, to your church, to your community because they are emotionally engaged. They are emotionally engaged because they are in relationship. And they are in relationship because we communicate with each other and tell the story. So as stewardship ministers, all year round, but especially in our fall giving campaigns, we connect folks in the pews so that the people who we are asking to pledge know the story and are emotionally connected to the church and to the other people in it. So there's an old joke that many of you may be familiar with, that is the only time folks get a letter from the church is when the church is asking them for money, right? It is our job to continue to transform this old adage and to communicate differently, because there's that other second old adage joke that the church is the one organization that takes money from folks and then tells them what they did with it a year later. These are old jokes. And Stephanie and I see more churches than we can name moving into a new normal, especially since the last recession a decade ago, living into the new normal of telling the stories throughout the year and telling them creatively and connecting folks in the pews deeper to what's going on.
And it will be really important, especially this year, to connect with people, to report back and to let them know how your congregation is making a difference in your community. Don't forget to let them know what you need so that they can really have a chance to help. This will be really important this year, particularly.
So, right, we are in a place to be really creative about telling folks what we need and how they can help and how they can be a part of being the hero in this story and really participating fully into God's call to them. But we need to tell them what the full call is and what we need for them to move deeper into relationship and participate in that story. So we're in a place where it is incumbent on us to be even in deeper relationship than we already are with folks in the pews and in our community, and to know their stories. Because these are living and moving right now, people are experiencing the story of their church and the story of how Jesus moves in their church in different ways. And some of these are really exciting. I think there are a lot of folks out there who didn't realize they could enjoy um, digital church, virtual church as much as they do. We also, of course, have the stories of loneliness and the stories of new ways people are experiencing heartache and despair and fear and grief. And we need to meet those stories as well. And with these stories, we need to be able to move toward our fall annual giving work, knowing where these stories are in our community now and understanding the new normal of the folks in our congregations. The fall annual giving work that we are beginning to think about now needs to resonate authentically in the fall. And we need to make sure that we're meeting people where they are. And for them to know that where they are now is normal and it is right and it is godly, and that we are able to begin to think about how we're going to communicate that we know we're in a different place when we get to fall communications. So now is the time, as we're moving from the sprint of figuring this out to the marathon of making it work in the new normal. Now is the time to ensure that we are answering today's call to discipleship, which is to check in on folks. So to be clear, we're not encouraging you to ensure that your church leadership is in touch with the members of your community because you want them to fill out a pledge card in October. That is not what we're doing. The ministry of stewardship is not transactional. It's transformational, because the deeper you move your ministry leaders into relationship with the community, the more generous your leaders are in relationship, the deeper the community is in relationship with each other, and the more generous your community is when they are in a place to respond. Generous leadership, generous relationships means generous community. So what can you be doing now? We're going to move down to the bottom section of this slide. What we can do now is to connect in meaningful ways. This is going to vary from church to church because it depends on what is authentic about their culture and context, and how you have a culture of communicating already. So you're going to need to take into account the size. You as stewardship leaders, if you're thinking about how you can communicate more effectively, of course, consider the size of your church, consider how you already communicate. I know that the way a number of churches were already communicating before the COVID crisis, and some have moved into communicating now. And if you're not already, could be a good way for you to consider communicating is for the vestry, each vestry member to get a part of the church directory. And that is that vestry member's call sheet. They use that, and for the folks that they know that the best way to communicate is with text, or they know that the best way to communicate is with a phone call, or they know that the best way is to drive by and park in the person's driveway and wave. Know your community, and know the way that is going to translate the best is the way you're going to build that relationship. So you can have vestry members take parts of the directory and check in on people. Another way is through your ministry area. If you've got a choir and you have a youth group and you have an altar guild, make sure that whoever chairs that area is checking in with the people. If you decide to go this way with your ministry areas, make sure that those who are not participating in some of those ministry areas also get the call. Be a great conversation for you to have right now, if you haven't already, with your clergy and with your vestry members, with your wardens, with your treasurer, to see the best way to connect, to see how folks are connecting with them, right? Another way to do that, we've seen a lot of success with churches that are doing Zoom calls. There are ways to have coffee hours digitally. You can have those all together, or you can break off into small groups. Some people love this. Some people love this more than they thought that they would. For some people, it's just not their thing to be in a digital coffee hour. So make sure that if it does work for a large population, for those for whom it's not working, you're able to communicate with them. And then, of course, drive-away moments. I'm seeing more and more of drive-by birthday parties where folks get in their car. I saw one yesterday that a beloved director of Christian education was moving from a church here in Virginia, and there were 40 or 45 cars full of church members riding up and down her street. And one of the cars had a sunroof in it, and they had gotten the banner from the church. So they were driving through the neighborhood with the church banner hanging out the top of the car. It was phenomenal. So, if you want to plan some neighborhood parades, especially if you're in a small community, it's a lot of fun, and it's so much fun even if you're not in a place to get out and to be in the car. It's so much fun to see that through Facebook or through the church website. So make these connections, and as you make these connections, make sure that your ministry leaders who are out communicating with folks are collecting information. You want to check in on welfare. That is the number one thing that you're checking in on. But my hunch is people are going to start telling you stories. They might even share some photographs. They might share some letters that they've gotten from their grandchildren. See with those folks if they would like to share those with a larger community. So be a repository. Work with your ministry leaders to collect that information. Write down the stories that they hear and get the photos now, so that when you get to where you're preparing for the fall annual giving campaign in full, you're not having a conversation at the end of August or beginning of September saying, I was talking with someone and they told me the best story, and I can't quite remember who that was or what that story was. I'm going to think about that. Collect that information now so that by the time you realize it's something you might want to include, you already have it. So collect. Then, after you've made your first connection and you're beginning to collect information, then it's time to make sure that you and your leadership team are doing the third point, that you are reconnecting, because that first connection is not a one-off. It is not a transactional piece to make sure you connect so that you feel okay with sending out that pledge information in the fall. It's not transactional. Check back in. Consider different ways within your community to check in a different way. So if you've done that vestry call sheet with the beginning, then with the second reconnect, perhaps it's time for the rector to send a letter to the choir members and check in with them. We're hearing some difficult news about how to have a choir now, because we're hearing that choirs are super spreaders. So check in with them, have that pastoral care check-in. You could ask perhaps some of your college kids who are back at home to check in with the youth. We have a lot of youth groups who may not most likely be able to take some of their youth mission trips or their youth pilgrimages. Have the college kids who have been through that check in with the youth and establish those relationships there. You could have your Sunday school do some work at home and send some of their artwork to some of the older folks in your community. Make sure as well that your leadership is teed up for conversations about what folks are anticipating. They might be anticipating summer camp and they're not able to do that. If you're in a church where you don't have a lot of youth and you're not anticipating summer camp for the youth, you may be in a church where the youth group begins at age 62. Right? So name that youth group. Maybe your youth group that begins at age 62 are the ones who always have Nana camp with their grandchildren who fly in from California for a couple weeks with grandma and grandpa. Check in with them as well. All right. And then as you reconnect. As you connect, you collect your stories, you reconnect. Be sure that you know your community and the way that you're communicating resonates deeply. We have churches that have theaters in the basement. We have churches that are deeply engaged in ecumenical music. Make sure that those touch points, the things that define the culture of your church and are authentic to your story, are also connection points as your ministry leaders are reaching out and connecting with your folks. All right. Do check in. Make sure that you're connecting with where we're meeting folks. You've got parents at home, as you've seen with my house. You got parents at home who are homeschooling and working full time. You've got a lot of boomers who are likely hearing, "Hey, you boomer, you're in a vulnerable group right now." Most boomers I know don't like to be told who they are, and they don't like to be told what to do, and they don't like to be put in a category, right? So check in on those boomers who are hearing information that does not connect with their generational identity. Perhaps have a small group conversation. It is okay to do some small group with specific areas of boomers who are hearing things that they don't want to hear, that doesn't meet the expectation of who they believe they are and who they believe their group is. So don't hesitate to hold a special conversation with particular areas. Lastly, before we move on to the next slide, be creative in how you're communicating. That first connection needs to be by voice. Have that phone call, leave that voicemail so that people have that learning point. So many of us are seeing screens and seeing people talk sort of at us and to us. Make sure that even if it's a voicemail, you're setting up your ministry leaders to have communication with the person, not at them, not to them, but with them. Then as you reconnect, listen to the stories that you've heard, listen to the stories that you've collected, and as you reconnect in a way that is meaningful. Perhaps a fun way to do it is to send a postcard. This is not a postcard, it is a coaster, but you can see if you have something that is a special visual, maybe something from inside the church, the candles, something that is going to really touch people, and it's going to feel different, and it's going to feel good in their hands, and they can hang it on their refrigerator. Send that, because that is going to be a visual connection that stays with them. As soon as the screens go down, sometimes it feels quite lonely. So to be able to walk into the kitchen and see that your magnet hanging up, that visual of the church, it's really important. And then the last idea that I have seen a number of churches doing is a social media idea. I've seen a number of churches, no words, no voices, and it's 60 seconds of a space within the church campus, or 60 seconds of a space that is calming and soothing. I will admit to you that on my phone, I have an app called Calm. It is a meditation app. And every time that I think, oh my goodness, I need a moment of calm, I go and I click on my app. And the first thing that app does is it gives you this beautiful blue screen, kind of like Stephanie's paint there. It gives you this beautiful blue screen. And in tiny little words, it says, breathe. And as much as I know, every time I click on, it's going to tell me to breathe. Every time I click on, it does give me the chance to go and take a breath. And my hunch is that, as I said, breathe, perhaps some of you took a breath. So offer these little moments, these 60 seconds of breathing with God through your social media, that is just 60 seconds of a flower that is blooming in your churchyard, that will give folks an opportunity to reconnect. Okay. I'm going to move to the next slide. Stephanie, I've done talking a lot. Is there anything that you would add as we move forward?
No, but I did take a chance to breathe right there too. So thank you.
And if you want the app,
I put my feet flat on the floor. I put my shoulders back and I expanded right from the diaphragm all the way up.
see, it's just, it's those healthy suggestions. And the app is called Calm for any of you who want it. It's fabulous. All right, we have about 15 minutes to go, and the rest of the conversation here moves a little bit more quickly than that one did. So just sit back, and we're going to move into some very different conversations for you to think about having with some folks in your congregation and the leaders within your church. So you see here at the top of this screen, I've got more generous givers, call and ask permission. What we are hearing from a number of churches is they of course are not sure how the economy is going to shake out. They're not sure how that is going to shake out with their spreadsheets and their finances with pledges coming in. You've seen from Stephanie that many churches are seeing a surge in giving. I'll also say that the folks who are seeing a surge in giving are the folks who are welcoming that and are talking about this is the way you can give. So it's important to continue to be in conversation, and as Stephanie had said, let folks know what your needs are and give them the chance to say yes and move into generosity. Give them the chance to say yes. But this conversation is specific. Think about who your most generous givers are. Quite often those are pledgers. I know many of us have folks in our churches who, we have folks who love to give large gifts and not pledge. So it's not just your pledge folks, it's those folks who love to come in and give gifts that are specific, right? So if your HVAC system is blown, you know the folks who come in and step in and say, I will help pay for that. When pews need repair, folks come in and they step into that. Think about those people. Go to those people now, check in with them first, make sure that you have checked in with them. But after you check in with the reconnection, connect with them and say, hey, we don't know what's coming. We don't exactly know what our financial needs are going to be in July. We don't know what those financial needs may be in September. I want to check in with you, say that out loud, and ask your permission that if I need to come to you, if we are in a challenging place, where are you right now? Is that something that I could come back and have that conversation with you about a specific need that I can't define for you right now? So go to your most generous donors, tell them where you are, and ask permission to come back if you need it. That way it gives you a chance to check in to see how they're doing, and if they are in a place in this new economy to be able to help you out with a special gift or with paying their pledge up front. Check in with them, ask permission. Another conversation to make sure that is at the top of your leadership's docket is some of our parishioners give through their required minimum distribution from their IRA. For our parishioners who are 70 and a half or older, they can, as many of you know, give that required minimum distribution from their IRA directly to the church and not pay taxes on it. And as the name indicates, it is required distribution every year. This year, with the response to the economy, everyone with a required minimum distribution is not this year required to take it. Many folks know this. There may be folks in your congregation who don't know this, who normally do give through this required minimum distribution. Go ahead and have that conversation with them now. Make sure that folks know that this is a part of the new tax plan, so that when they get to, say, October or November, when they usually take that required minimum distribution, and then you don't want to set yourself up for them calling their financial advisor saying, I'm ready for the required minimum distribution. That financial officer saying, you know, you don't have to take it. And then they look and they see that they may decide not to. But at that point, they're going to need to be in a place to give to you in a way that does work for them. Let your folks know. Make sure that your folks in your church know about the required minimum distribution so that you can plan together, because they want to give, but we all need to make sure that we're doing it in the healthiest finances for our household. So just make sure that they know. And as Stephanie has indicated before, don't stop asking. Continue to tell people what your needs are. Continue to give them the opportunity to say yes to donating and being generous to your church. All right. Our third screen is on planning. If any of you know Stephanie and me personally, you know that we love new platforms and ways to organize. If you haven't had a chance for us to get to know each other really well, we would be really happy to meet with you on the side and just geek out on all the different systems and platforms where we can organize. These on the screen are a few of our favorites, and this is where you set out a plan, if you don't have one already, to communicate with your ministry leaders, to make sure that they are organized for making those connection calls in the beginning, checking in on folks. And then that system will also set you up for them to be able to record. Yes, I was able to call Stephanie. Yes, she is doing okay. In this new normal, Stephanie knows a lot of things about this. We can connect with her about this. We didn't know that about her before. So it's a place, it's your repository for you to curate your stories. If folks in your parish want to share photographs or anything else that might be a part of telling the story of what's going on in your church or a part of your annual giving fall campaign, this is a place to collect that information as well. So repository to curate what you're hearing so that by the time you get to the late summer and you're beginning to think about how you're going to roll out annual giving, you have everything there waiting for you and you're able to be agile as we're responding to what's going on in larger society. These are some of the ones that we love. The top ones, Google Docs, Basecamp, Microsoft Teams, these are all regular plans of software. Slack is a place that kind of brings all of these platforms together. And then Canva, if you all look at our Facebook page, you'll see that we do a lot of graphics with a prayer, with a photograph. Canva is a place that has templates for you to create these. And it's a great repository as well because you can upload photos to it, you can keep folders, it is all free. So it is a place where you can plan to tell your story visually, and Stephanie and I love it. We spend a lot of time on it. We use it frequently with our ministries and couldn't recommend it more. So just remember, this is a cut and paste from a previous slide. The things that you are putting into whichever platform you choose is how you're connecting initially, the information that you are collecting, how you are planning to reconnect, perhaps beginning to use some of the stories that you've heard from the first connection, and how you can make sure that what you are planning is connecting authentically with the community that you know and is creative in a way that helps them stay in relationship. So lastly, we're going to talk next week more about the things that you see on the screen, but we want to go ahead and prompt those conversations now so that you can take this week with your leaders to begin to tee up some of these ideas. We need to think about and be prepared for and responsive for what is going to happen in the fall. We have our annual giving cycle, right? It's going to be one calendar. We're going to have where we are with the COVID crisis, which is a piece that we don't know, but that is going to be sitting on top of the annual giving cycle that we will begin in the fall. On top of that is going to be the economic response for our country and internationally, where we are in a recession or headed into a depression. We're going to need to keep that on top of both of these other calendars. And we also are moving into an election season, right? So we're going to have that election cycle on top of the annual giving, on top of the COVID, on top of the economy recovery, and on top of wherever we are with moving back into living in our buildings. That's not to scare you. We don't have answers right now, but what we do have are some initial suggestions and some ways to prepare ourselves to be agile. One of our initial suggestions for you to go ahead and to begin considering now is to make your campaign shorter. Quite often, an annual giving cycle is about 6 weeks, depending on the church and what's going on in the church. Some extend that to 8 weeks. Our suggestion is for you to consider making that significantly shorter. Because of COVID, we don't want to spend too much time on the metrics, on the pledge cards and the amounts. We want to give folks the opportunity to give, but mainly we want to be in a place to be responsive and pastoral. Also, as you consider making it shorter, consider when it's going to end. Most cycles end somewhere mid to late November. We're suggesting, and you will hear us say this as we begin to prepare for annual giving specifically, to end at the end of October. We have elections that first Tuesday of November. My hunch is that regardless of which way the election goes, there is going to be a lot of textured emotion around it. And we need to make sure, number one, that we're not asking folks to fill out a pledge card when they are in such textured emotion. But mainly, we need to liberate our clergy and our ministry leaders to be responsive then. And if your church is deep into and anticipating pledge cards coming in November, when you're also trying to be pastorally responsive to whatever happened with the election, we're not offering our clergy and our lay leaders the time and the space that they need to do the ministry that they're going to be called to in November. So consider ending your pledge campaign at the end of October. And all of these things, as we anticipate these things, it's going to allow us to be to have some holy agility, right? It's going to lower our anxiety. We will have more of a non-anxious presence as leaders in our congregations. And that non-anxious presence is going to free us to be even more creative in this new normal. And it is going to free us to be responsive. So what we're going to talk about next week will include ways to begin to prepare for the fall so that we have a number of options. And as we move into whatever is next, we're not trying to create as we go. We're just choosing which is the best response when we get there. We have a number of resources here, and we've got just a few more minutes to go. I'm going to invite Stephanie to offer any wisdom that she might have as I have been talking, and also give you all the chance in chat to ask any questions that we might be able to respond to.
Yes, as I go ahead and post our contact information again and remind you that we would love to have your feedback and input on future topics. Please also have this time for your questions. There was a lovely interchange, our interaction, Julie, about your comment about boomers. Yes, there was some concurrence there, and a reminder that boomers are not ready to be shoved aside, but are very glad to be helping with transitions for others into leadership. So thank you all for that. Not seeing anything in the Q&A.
Okay.
Checking the chat to see if we have anything. If you have questions that come up later, do please reach out to us. You have our emails, and you can most certainly reach out to us on our Facebook page as well. We would love to have conversations come there as well.
All right.
Surely. Oh, okay, wait a minute. I see a couple things in the chat. We implemented several ideas from last week, and I'm sure we'll have more this week. Thank you. Great.
And hello to St. Anne's in Reston.
Excellent.
That's fantastic.
That's awesome.
All right, well, we will close, we'll get ready to close out here. Stephanie?
Yes, absolutely. So for next week's webinar, just teeing this up, as Julie mentioned, we are going to talk about what happens if you don't get the bump that we talked about in the giving curve. And Julie and I will also talk about resources from within the church and elsewhere that we find most helpful. Julie will also go more deeply into the Holy Agility and planning for your fall annual giving program. We invite you to send your favorite resources to us because we are all richer when we share what we know. So you can send us those through email or give us a shout on Facebook too. We'd love to see those. So I'm going to go ahead and close us in prayer. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Inspire us with your spirit of wisdom. Plant seeds of your vision in our hearts and minds. Give us joy and delight in your working with one another, so that we may know the privilege of participating in the coming about of your kingdom. Amen.
Amen. Folks, it was great to have this morning with you. Thank you for being with us. Please let folks know that we are here. We look forward to all of our future conversations and to seeing you again and some of the other leaders that you invite. So have a great Thursday.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.